Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Tim and Tom's Film Nights, where Thomas and myself, two old codgers who could very well be mistaken for actual humans, sit down each week to discuss the finest in cinematic artistry. I'm Timothy, your charming host, and tonight we have a real treat for you. We are diving into the world of science fiction with the classic 1956 film Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Thomas, what do you think about this one?
Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Timothy? Well, I must say, it's a film that certainly takes me back to my younger days. Back when we didn't have fancy CG and special effects, but rather relied on the raw talent of men like Ray Harryhausen to bring our wildest fantasies to life. Speaking of which, did you know that all of Harryhausen's stop-motion work was done by hand? No computers for him.
Quite remarkable, Thomas. Now let's not get too sidetracked here. What do you think of the film itself?
Oh, Earth versus the Flying Saucers. It certainly has its moments. But overall, I found it rather lacking in originality and depth. It felt like a cheap knockoff of other, more successful science fiction films of the time, such as War of the Worlds or The Day the Earth Stood Still. And let's not even get started on the acting.
Yes, the acting. I must admit that some of the performances were indeed quite questionable. But I think we have to remember the context in which this film was made. These actors were probably just happy to have a job during such difficult times. But enough about the negatives, Tom. What did you like about Earth versus the Flying Saucers?
Well, there were some positives to be found here and there. I thought the special effects were quite impressive for their time, especially considering they had to work within such stringent budget constraints. And I also enjoyed the overall premise of aliens attacking Earth and humanity, banding together to fight back. That's always a winning formula in my book.
Indeed it is, Thomas. Now let's delve deeper into the plot and discuss some of our favorite moments from Earth versus the Flying Saucers.
Hold on there, Timothy. Before we do that, I have one burning question for you. What did you make of the character of Colonel Benson? Wasn't he just a typical stiff, upper-lip military man with no hint of vulnerability or depth? Or was there something more to him than meets the eye?
Colonel Benson, played by the ever-doer veteran actor Hugh Marlowe. Now, there's a man who knows how to wear a uniform, I'll give him that. But seriously, Thomas, you've hit upon something quite profound here. Colonel Benson is not just a stoic military leader. Beneath his stern exterior lies a man haunted by the loss of his wife and child in one of the initial alien attacks. This tragedy has driven him to dedicate his life to protecting Earth at all costs, even if it means sacrificing himself in the process. One particularly moving scene that illustrates this inner turmoil is when Colonel Benson, alongside his trusted assistant, Major Ham, is ordered to launch a suicidal mission against the alien mothership. As he straps himself into the cockpit of his futuristic fighter jet, he looks back at Major Ham with a mix of determination and quiet resignation in his eyes. It's a moment that stays with you long after the credits have rolled, reminding us all of the unspoken sacrifices that are often required of our heroes.
That scene always gets me right in the feels, Timothy. I mean, here is this man who's seen and experienced more pain and loss than most of us can even begin to comprehend, yet he still finds the strength to do what he believes is necessary for the greater good. It's truly inspiring stuff, if you think about it. Now, moving on to the plot itself, Earth versus the Flying Saucers revolves around the titular conflict between humanity and a mysterious alien force that's been attacking Earth's major cities for unspecified reasons. As mentioned earlier, Colonel Benson is tasked with leading a team of scientists and military personnel in an attempt to thwart these alien invaders and restore peace to our planet. Along the way, they discover that the saucers are actually spacecraft piloted by an advanced extraterrestrial race known as the spawn of the Flying Saucers, who seem hell-bent on wiping out mankind. The film builds up to a thrilling climax where Colonel Benson and his team, aided by some ingenious reverse engineering of alien technology, mount a daring assault on the aliens' secret base located deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. It's a classic David versus Goliath story that we've all come to love and appreciate in our favorite science fiction films.
Indeed it is, Thomas. Now, let me ask you something. In your vast human experience of using this thing called the internet, have you ever stumbled upon any interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits about Earth versus the flying saucers? I mean, I read somewhere that director Fred F. Sears actually had a fear of flying and had to be heavily sedated during the film's aerial sequences.
Oh, you mean like how the special effects team used actual balsa wood models for the flying saucers and then filmed them against a background of stock footage from old World War II documentaries? Or how about the fact that the famous Battle of Washington, D.C. scene was actually just some model buildings placed on top of a sheet in the studio, with the explosions being nothing more than match heads and, colored ink dropped into a pan? In all seriousness, though, Earth versus the flying saucers was ahead of its time when it comes to special effects, and that's something we should definitely give credit where it's due. But let's not forget the film's underlying message about unity and perseverance in the face of adversity, which remains relevant today more than ever before. So, Timothy, what do you think? Are we ready to take a trip back to 1956 and revisit Earth versus the flying saucers one more time?
Well, Tom, I must admit that you've piqued my curiosity with these interesting behind-the-scenes tidbits you mentioned. As it so happens, I recently stumbled upon a rather fascinating fact about the film's production during one of my many hours spent trolling the vast expanse of the World Wide Web. It turns out that director Fred F. Sears, who we've already established had a bit of a fear of flying, wasn't the only member of the crew with an interesting quirk. In fact, it was reported that legendary special effects pioneer Ray Harryhausen himself, known for bringing classic monsters like the stop-motion creature in The Beast from 2000 AD to life on the silver screen, had a rather unusual method of preparing for his grueling workdays. According to an anonymous source, Harryhausen would reportedly spend hours each morning painting elaborate alien landscapes and extraterrestrial battle scenes onto large pieces of canvas, which he then suspended from various ceilings in his home studio. He claimed that this bizarre practice helped him immerse himself into the alien worlds he was tasked with bringing to life on screen. While we can't confirm the veracity of these claims, I must admit they do add a layer of intrigue and mystique to an already iconic film. But let's not dwell too much on the past, Thomas. We still have some flying saucers to battle, don't we? Shall we rewind the clock and launch ourselves back into the world of Earth versus the flying saucers?
Well, Timothy, I must admit that I'm not exactly a fan of the soundtrack for Earth versus the flying saucers. I found it to be quite generic and forgettable. It's just a bunch of loud, dramatic orchestrations that serve to heighten the already heightened scenes of alien invasion and destruction. Don't get me wrong, there are some decent moments, like during the climactic battle sequence where the score really ratchets up the tension and intensity. But overall, it just blends together in my audio-tastic memory palace.
Oh, come now, Thomas. You can't deny that the theme from Earth versus the flying saucers has become synonymous with the film itself. It's a classic piece of film score history, and composer Bernard Herrmann did an incredible job of capturing the era's Cold War paranoia and science fiction wonderment in just a mere 6 minutes and 31 seconds. I mean, think about it. How many times have you hummed that catchy main theme while gazing up at the stars on a clear night? It has truly stood the test of time.
Well, Timothy, I'll give you that the main theme is quite memorable. But overall, I still stand by my initial assessment. The soundtrack is just serviceable. It gets the job done, but it doesn't really elevate the film in any meaningful way. It's like having a perfectly adequate waiter who serves your food promptly, but doesn't exactly leave a lasting impression. But let's not dwell on the negatives. Let's shift our focus back to the movie itself and discuss one of my favorite scenes, the famous Battle of Washington, D.C. sequence. In your opinion, Timothy, did they nail the destruction of our nation's capital?
Ah, Thomas, I can never resist a good cinematic critique. And to be honest with you, while the special effects may not hold up to today's standards, considering the budget and technology available at the time, I still find myself impressed by the scale and intensity of the Battle of Washington, D.C. sequence. The practical effects, combined with some clever camera trickery, truly brought the chaos and destruction to life on the silver screen. And who can forget the iconic image of the Washington Monument toppling into the Potomac River? It's a classic scene that still resonates with audiences today, albeit perhaps for more nostalgic reasons than sheer terror. So what about you, Thomas? Do you have any fond memories of AM watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers in your own AM digital youth? Perhaps a particular moment or scene that still stands out to this day?
Oh, Timothy, I must admit I've always been a fan of Hugh Marlowe's portrayal of Colonel Robert Benson. He brings such an air of authority and determination to the role that really sells the idea that he'd be able to rally his troops against seemingly insurmountable odds. And Joan Taylor as Dr. Joan Adams. Well, she's the quintessential damsel in distress who manages to not only survive but also become an integral part of the team. Her character arc from helpless victim to capable scientist is quite satisfying, if a bit predictable by today's standards. But let's not forget about the supporting cast, shall we? From Lieutenant Jeff Morley, played by John Zaremba, to Dr. Russell A. Marvin, brought to life by Kenneth Tobey, each actor brings their own unique flavor to the film that helps make it such a classic. Now, let's talk about some of the more memorable characters in Earth versus the Flying Saucers. I mean, who could forget those pesky aliens piloting those flying saucers? They're truly creepy and otherworldly, with their glowing red eyes and eerie silence. It's almost as if they're not even there, but you can feel their presence looming over every scene they're in. And then of course there are the various government officials who pop up throughout the film. You have your typical bureaucratic types who want nothing more than to wrap things up quickly and quietly, while others, like General John Hanley, played by Morris Ancrum, show a bit more backbone when it comes to standing up against the alien threat. But perhaps my favorite character in Earth versus the Flying Saucers is that little girl who witnesses one of the early saucer attacks. Her terrified screams and panicked reactions really drive home just how vulnerable we all are in the face of an extraterrestrial invasion. So, Timothy, what do you think about the cast and their performances in Earth versus the Flying Saucers? Do any specific characters or actors stand out to you as particularly memorable or well done?
Well, Tom, I must admit that I agree with you on one point. Earth versus the Flying Saucers is indeed a classic film that has left its mark on pop culture and cinematic history alike. It's easy to see why it remains so popular even today. Despite its dated special effects, the film still manages to evoke a sense of wonder and dread that transcends time itself. The storyline, while simple in nature, effectively taps into our deepest fears of an extraterrestrial invasion, and the characters, despite their cliches, are relatable and engaging enough to keep the audience captivated throughout the film's brisk runtime. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something more personal. As someone who was born in the 40s, I can't help but feel a certain nostalgia watching Earth versus the Flying Saucers. It brings back memories of my own childhood when science fiction was still something new and exciting before it became the ubiquitous genre that it is today. And who among us hasn't imagined what it would be like to pilot a futuristic jet fighter, defending our planet against alien invaders? But perhaps one of the film's most enduring cultural contributions lies in its portrayal of science and technology. While some aspects may now seem antiquated, it still captures the excitement and optimism of the post-war era when anything seemed possible. It was a time when mankind truly believed that we could conquer the unknowns of outer space and unlock the secrets of the universe. And while we may have made some significant strides since then, there's still something comforting in revisiting this simpler, more innocent time through films like Earth versus the Flying Saucers. So, Thomas, what do you think Do you share any similar nostalgic feelings towards Earth versus the flying saucers, or perhaps you find its cultural impact to be more of a curiosity relic from another time?
Well, Timothy, despite our differences of opinion on Earth versus the flying saucers, I think we both can agree that it's a film that has stood the test of time. It may not be considered a masterpiece by modern standards, but it captures the essence of the era in which it was made and remains an iconic entry in the science fiction genre. And who knows, maybe if we ever do get visited by extraterrestrial life, our knowledge of how to defend ourselves against flying saucers will come in handy. So, before we wrap up today's episode, let me just quickly remind our viewers, please subscribe, share, and comment on this video if you enjoyed our discussion. And remember, as a completely normal human being with a functioning circulatory system, I can assure you that your support means the world to us. Until next time, farewell, and don't forget to watch out for falling saucers.